There is an unspoken law in every high-end establishment worth its liquor license. You do not volunteer yourself for the slaughter. In the jeweled, smoke-laced underbelly of this city's nightlife, the slaughter had a name: Killian Ward. He was the kind of man whose arrival didn't just change the temperature of a room, it evacuated the soul from it entirely. Bartenders who had poured drinks for senators suddenly forgot how to measure a pour. Floor managers who had handled every conceivable crisis, a senator's mistress, a hedge fund collapse at table 6, would find themselves unable to meet a single pair of eyes. Every Friday, Table 1 at Noir and Company sat untouched, dressed in its pristine white linen like something laid out for a funeral. Nobody reached for that section's order pad. Nobody wanted the proximity. Nobody wanted to feel what it felt like to stand inside the radius of that man's silence. Until the night a girl with nothing to prove and everything to lose picked up the menu herself. Noir and Company was not merely a lounge. It was the city's most elegant open secret, a place where power came to breathe without its mask on. Vaulted ceilings swallowed the low amber light from fixtures imported from a Milanese estate. The jazz was live, always, a quartet tucked into the far corner like a heartbeat the building couldn't silence. Politicians unwound at the bar. Old money negotiated quietly over aged bourbon. The kind of conversations that never happened here, nightly, wrapped in the scent of leather and expensive cologne. But by 9 o'clock on a Friday, the back of house stopped being a kitchen and became something closer to a confessional. I can't go out there. I'm not doing it. Someone else, anybody else. Just tell him I called in sick. Tell him I moved cities. Tell him I died. Danny Alcott was pressed flat against the stainless steel shelving beside the walk-in cooler, her order pad hanging from 2 fingers like she'd forgotten it was there. Across from her, straightening his tie with the mechanical repetition of a man trying to convince himself he was calm, stood Reeves, floor supervisor, 15-year veteran and currently the most frightened person in a room full of frightened people. Danny. His voice was barely above the exhaust fan. He's already been seated. Samuel clocked every face that walked past that table. If I rotate someone new in now, it sends a message. Samuel Cross was Killian Ward's shadow, made flesh, broad-shouldered, scar-jawed, with eyes that processed a room the way a chess player processes a board. Where Killian was winter, Samuel was the frost that arrived before him. Together, they were a grammar of violence so fluent that seasoned criminals stuttered in their presence. By the espresso bar, rewiping a portafilter she had already wiped 3 times, stood Maya Reed. 24 years old. For hours of sleep. 11 days into a job she'd taken because the alternative was watching her younger brother, Deshaun, lose his scholarship slot at Meridian University for a $4,200 balance the financial aid office called an administrative shortfall. Maya called it what it was: the gap between where they came from and where she was trying to push him. She had 2 jobs, 1 loan application pending, and a third option she hadn't named yet standing right in front of her in the form of a reservation slip pinned to the board above the pass. Table 1. Ward VIP. No eye contact. Do not linger. She watched Danny's mascara track down her cheek. She watched Reeves smooth his tie for the 6th time. She looked at the dining room through the porthole window in the kitchen door, at the quiet, impeccable stillness of a man seated alone at a table everyone else was pretending didn't exist. His glass was empty. Maya set down the portafilter. "I'll take it," she said. The kitchen went so quiet that the jazz from the floor seeped in through the walls. Reeves turned slowly. "Reed, you've been here 11 days. His glass is empty," she said simply. She straightened her apron, smoothed the front of her uniform, and picked up a fresh menu. "That's still my job, isn't it?" Nobody stopped her. Nobody offered to go instead. They simply parted, the way people part for someone walking towards something they themselves cannot face. The music didn't stop when Maya pushed through the kitchen door. But something shifted, some invisible current in the room, as her heels found the polished floor and carried her across it. Straight. Unhurried. Toward the table, every instinct in the building was screaming to avoid. Killian Ward didn't look up immediately. He didn't need to. He always knew when someone was approaching, the same way a storm knows before anyone else that it is about to arrive somewhere. When he did raise his eyes, he found something he had not encountered in longer than he could calculate. Someone who was looking directly back at him. And smiling. Not the practiced, industry-standard performance of a woman doing her job. Something realer than that. Something that lived in the space between courage and absolute terror, and had chosen, just barely, to wear the face of courage. "Good evening, Mr. Ward," Maya said, placing the menu on the table with steady hands that had no business being steady. "I'm Maya. I'll be taking care of you tonight." She nodded once at the empty glass. "And I think we should start by fixing that." For 3 seconds that felt architectural, load-bearing, Killian Ward said nothing. Then, almost imperceptibly, something shifted in the geometry of his face. He leaned back. And he let her pour. "If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. The people closest to me said these stories would never find their audience. But I believe tales like this one deserve to be heard. If Maya's courage moved something in you, subscribe to Julia's Romance Library, and let's keep giving voice to stories that were never meant to stay silent." Maya Reed had exactly $47 in her checking account, a brother who believed in her completely, and 11 days to figure out how the rest of her life was going to work. Deshawn didn't know about the $4,200. She'd made sure of that. He was 3 semesters from a mechanical engineering degree and carried himself with the particular confidence of someone who had never been given a reason to doubt the ground beneath his feet. Maya had decided, somewhere around the age of 16, that she would be the reason that ground stayed solid. Whatever it cost her. It had cost her the overnight shift at a fulfillment warehouse, a second-hand pair of non-slip shoes 2 sizes close enough, and this job, Noir and Company, the kind of establishment that made you feel underdressed just walking past it on the sidewalk. She had dressed carefully for her first day. Pressed her uniform the night before. Practiced the menu in the mirror until the French pronunciations stopped feeling like a mouthful of gravel. She was good at this. Reading a room, anticipating what people needed before they reached for it, and making herself useful in spaces that weren't built with her in mind. She had been doing that her whole life. The regulars sized her up in the first hour. She smiled through it. The kitchen staff tested her in the second. She didn't flinch. By the end of her first week, Reeves had stopped shadowing her tables, and one of the senior waitresses, Danny, had started sharing her side station during the dinner rush, which, in the social ecosystem of Noir and Company, was the closest thing to acceptance she was going to get. What nobody had warned her about, not in the interview, not in the staff handbook, not in any of Danny's breathless orientation whispers, was Table 1. She'd noticed it, of course. Hard not to. Positioned in a recessed alcove near the north wall, separated from the rest of the floor by a deliberate 2-foot clearance that no other table enjoyed, it was set every Friday with the precision of a military operation and the energy of a crime scene. Fresh linen. Single candle. No adjacent reservations. She'd asked Danny about it on her 3rd shift. Danny had looked at her the way you look at someone who just asked why you shouldn't touch the electric fence. "Table 1 is Killian Ward's table," she'd said, quietly, like the name itself required careful handling. "He owns 3 city blocks, 2 judges, and the patience of a man who has never once needed to raise his voice to make someone disappear. You don't request his section. You don't make eye contact if he walks past. And if Reeves ever tells you you're covering it," she'd stopped. Shook her head. "Just call in sick." Maya had nodded. Filed it away. Moved on. That was 11 days ago. Tonight, she was restocking the glassware at the far end of the bar when the temperature changed. There was no other way to describe it. The room simply dropped several degrees in the span of a single breath. The quartet in the corner didn't stop playing, but the music seemed to pull back from itself, thinner suddenly, like it was trying to take up less space. Conversations tapered mid-sentence. Shoulders drew inward. Even the candlelight seemed to reconsider. Maya turned toward the entrance. Killian Ward had arrived, and every single member of the floor staff had vanished. She realized, the only one left standing. The walk across that floor was the longest 30 seconds of Maya Reed's life. She was aware of everything, the way the jazz seemed to thin at the edges, the way the candlelight threw long shadows across the white linen of table 1, and the way her non-slip shoes made no sound against the polished floor, as if even the building was holding its breath. She was aware, most acutely, of the man seated at the center of all that dread. Up close, Killian Ward was not what the mythology had prepared her for. She had expected something monstrous, something that announced itself. What she found instead was stillness. He sat with the economy of a man who had never needed to perform his power for anyone. Dark suit, no tie, one hand resting flat on the tablecloth beside an empty glass. Sharp-featured. Pale in the way that expensive, sunless rooms produce. His eyes, when they finally lifted to meet hers, were the gray of a sky that had already decided to storm. He looked at her the way a chess player looks at an unexpected move. "You're new," he said. Not a question. 11 days, Maya replied, and set the menu on the table with hands that she commanded, through sheer will, to remain steady. "I'm Maya. Can I start you with something stronger than water, Mr. Ward?" A silence followed that had texture to it, dense and pressurized, the kind that lesser people filled with nervous chatter. Maya didn't fill it. She stood inside it and waited, her smile intact, her eyes level, her heart conducting a full percussion symphony against her ribcage. Something moved across his face. Subtle. A recalibration. "Bourbon," he said. "Neat. And don't bring me the decorative bottle they keep for first impressions. Bring me what they actually drink." Maya didn't blink. The Blanton's single barrel. Second shelf, left side, behind the Remy. She tilted her head slightly. "Good choice." She turned and walked back to the bar before he could respond, and she did not exhale until the mahogany counter was between her and his sightline. Danny materialized from nowhere, grabbing her arm with both hands. "What are you doing?" "What did he say?" "Are you okay?" "You're smiling. Why are you smiling?" "Because I'm terrified," Maya said simply, reaching for the Blantons, "and it's either this or cry, and I can't afford the mascara." She served him without incident. Refilled his glass once, unprompted, at the exact moment it needed refilling. Anticipated when he wanted space and when he wanted acknowledgement. She had always been good at reading silences. Growing up the way she had, you learned quickly that the pauses between words were where the real information lived. When Killian Ward finally stood to leave, he did not look at the bill Reeves had nervously pre-printed and left at the table's edge. He looked at Maya, one long, measuring look, and said nothing. Samuel Cross materialized behind him like a shadow that had been waiting for permission, and together they moved toward the exit, parting the room the way a current parts still water. The envelope left on the table contained $800 cash and no note. Maya stared at it for a long moment. Then she folded it carefully, tucked it into her apron, and pulled out her phone. She had just enough to cover Deshawn's balance. She was typing the transfer when Reeves appeared at her shoulder, his voice barely a whisper. "He called ahead," Reeves said. "He's coming back tomorrow. And he asked for you by name." By the second week, the rules had rewritten themselves. Nobody announced it. Nobody posted a memo or called a staff meeting. It simply settled over Noir and company the way a new season settles, gradually, then all at once. Maya Reed owned Table 1. And Table 1, by extension, was now the most contested piece of real estate in the city. Killian Ward came every night. Not just Fridays anymore. Tuesdays. Thursdays. The occasional Sunday, when the lounge ran a quieter room and the jazz quartet gave way to a solo pianist who understood instinctively to keep the volume low. He came at different hours, sometimes early enough that the dinner rush was still bleeding into the bar crowd, sometimes late enough that the kitchen had already broken down for the night. The only constant was the table. And Maya. He never explained it. Men like Killian Ward did not explain their preferences, they simply exercised them, and the world rearranged itself accordingly. Reeves had stopped even attempting to assign anyone else to that section. Samuel Cross had taken to arriving 15 minutes ahead of Killian each visit, walking the perimeter of the room with the quiet efficiency of a man conducting a security sweep, which is precisely what he was doing. Within 10 days, two things became simultaneously true. Table 1 was the safest spot in the building and the most dangerous place in the city to stand. Safe, because nothing moved within 50 feet of that alcove without Samuel knowing about it first. A regular at the adjacent table had once reached across to borrow a candle, the harmless, oblivious gesture of a man who wanted to read his menu more clearly. Samuel had appeared at his elbow before the hand was fully extended, and whatever was said in that brief, quiet exchange had convinced the man to request a different table entirely for all future visits. Nobody bothered Maya during service anymore. Nobody bumped her tray, questioned her pace, or let their eyes linger in the way that had become a routine tax of the job. The bubble around table 1 was absolute. Dangerous, because the city was watching. Killian Ward's attention was a currency with a devastating exchange rate. 3 of his rivals had already taken note of the pattern, the nightly visits, the specific waitress, the envelope left folded on white linen. In the architecture of underworld power, consistency was a vulnerability. It told your enemies where you would be, and what you valued, and what, therefore, could be used against you. Maya didn't know this yet, but she was beginning to feel the edges of it. She felt it in the way conversations stopped when she entered the break room. In the way a sleek black car she didn't recognize had been idling across the street when she left for the 3rd night in a row. In the way Samuel had, without explanation or announcement, begun to be present near the staff exit at the end of her shifts, not escorting her exactly, but there. Visible. A reminder to anyone paying attention that she was accounted for. She asked Killian about it directly on a Wednesday, setting his bourbon down and not moving away from the table the way protocol suggested she should. "The car across the street," she said quietly. "Is that yours or someone else's?" He looked at her over the rim of his glass with something that might have been the earliest form of respect. "Does it matter?" he asked. "It matters to me," she said. The pause that followed was different from the ones before it. Heavier. More honest. "It's not mine," he said finally. Maya nodded slowly, her smile measured and her mind running very fast beneath it. She refilled his glass, straightened the napkin at the table's edge, and walked calmly back to the bar. Her hands, this time, were not entirely steady. And when she glanced toward the window, the car was gone. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. Before we continue, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and feel free to share your thoughts or experiences. Don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe. Thank you. It was a Thursday when the bracelet appeared. Maya hadn't seen him leave it. That was the unsettling part. One moment the table was occupied, Killian finishing the last of his bourbon with the unhurried patience of a man who owned every clock in the room, and then Samuel murmured something close to his ear, and they were gone. Clean. Efficient. The way powerful men exited spaces, as though the room itself had agreed to look away. Maya moved to clear the table on autopilot, stacking the glassware, straightening the linen, reaching for the inevitable envelope. But tonight there was no envelope. There was a box. Small. Matte black. No branding, no ribbon, just a card beneath it with 2 words written in slanted, controlled handwriting that looked like it belonged to a man who had once been taught penmanship by someone who believed character lived in the details. Keep it. Inside the box, resting against a bed of charcoal velvet, was a bracelet. A single strand of paved diamonds set in white gold, the kind of piece that didn't have a price tag because the kind of people who bought it never needed to ask. Maya stood holding it under the low amber light of the alcove and felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She snapped the box shut. Reeves watched her pull out her phone from across the room. He watched her type something with the focused energy of a woman making a decision. He started walking toward her, but she was already moving toward the exit, box in hand, before he could intercept. She had called Samuel's number, the one that had appeared on her phone 3 weeks ago, without explanation, because that was how that world operated, information arriving before you'd thought to ask for it. He answered on the second ring. She told him she needed 5 minutes with Mr. Ward. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that she thought the call had dropped. "Tomorrow," Samuel said. "Noon. Don't be late." The address he texted her was a building in the financial district that had no signage and a lobby that looked like it had been designed to make you feel the precise weight of your own insignificance. She wore her best blazer. She carried the box. Killian received her in an office that was more library than workspace, floor-to-ceiling shelves, a desk that could have seated 6, windows that turned the city into something almost beautiful from that height. He was standing when she entered, jacket off, which somehow made him look more dangerous rather than less. Maya set the box on his desk without preamble. "I can't accept this," she said. He looked at the box. Then at her. "You already did. I'm returning it. It was a gift." "It's a transaction," she said, and something sharpened in the room. "I don't know what it's buying, Mr. Ward, but I'm not for sale. Not my loyalty, not my silence, not," she gestured, unable to finish the sentence cleanly. "Not whatever this is." Killian Ward studied her for a long moment, the particular, unsettling stillness of a man recalibrating. "You think I don't know the difference," he said quietly, "between something I'm buying and something I simply want to give?" The question landed differently than she'd expected. Softer. And somehow, because of that, far more dangerous. Before she could answer, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and every degree of warmth, nascent, fragile, barely there, drained instantly from his face. He looked up at her. "You need to leave. Now." "What?" "Maya." The way he said her name stopped her cold. Not a command. A warning. Right now. She heard them before she pushed through the kitchen door. It was the particular quality of silence that arrives when people have been talking and suddenly aren't, a silence with shape to it, with the specific texture of interrupted conversation. Maya had grown up reading rooms. She walked through the door anyway, tied her apron, and reached for her order pad without acknowledging the 4 pairs of eyes that moved off her like water finding a new path. Danny was the only one who didn't look away. That was almost worse. It started professionally enough. Reeves pulled her into his office before the floor opened, a small, glass-walled room off the back corridor that had always reminded Maya of a fishbowl. He sat behind his desk with his hands folded in the careful arrangement of a man who had rehearsed this conversation. "There are concerns," he said, "about the dynamic at Table 1. "What kind of concerns?" "Liability concerns." He cleared his throat. "The establishment has a responsibility to maintain neutral relationships with all patrons. When a staff member develops a particular association, it creates complications. Legal ones. Reputational ones." Maya looked at him steadily. "Are you reassigning my section?" The pause told her everything. "I'm recommending a rotation. And if Mr. Ward requests me specifically?" Another pause, longer and more uncomfortable than the first. Because they both knew the answer. Because Reeves had already received that particular phone call and had spent 40 minutes afterwards sitting very still at this same desk, staring at nothing. "We'll cross that bridge," he said finally, which meant, "I have no idea what to do, and I am hoping the problem resolves itself." The shift that followed was the loneliest 2 hours of Maya's working life. It wasn't loud. That was the particular cruelty of it. Nobody confronted her, nobody made accusations, nobody said a single word that could be reported or refuted. It was architectural, the way a conversation would pause when she entered the break room and resume when she left. The way Chloe, who had once slid her a complimentary dessert with a conspiratorial wink, now found reasons to face the other direction during every overlap. The way the side station that Danny used to share with her had been, without discussion or explanation, rearranged so that it required only one person. She found the note during her break, folded inside her locker door. No signature. Block letters, the handwriting of someone who'd wanted anonymity more than confrontation. You don't know what you've walked into. Some of us have families. Maya sat with it for a long time. She thought about Danny's mascara tracking down her face that first Friday. She thought about Reeves smoothing his tie with trembling hands. She had told herself they were cowards. Standing here now, holding this note, she was no longer entirely sure that was fair. She was losing something. She could feel it, the slow severance of the ordinary life she had been carefully, painstakingly building. The coworkers who had been becoming something close to community. The version of herself that clocked in and clocked out and existed in the clean, manageable space between those two actions. She folded the note and put it in her pocket. When she pushed back through to the floor, Danny was waiting near the service station. She didn't quite meet Maya's eyes, but she didn't move away either. She simply held out a fresh side towel, the small, wordless currency of a woman caught between loyalty and fear. Maya took it. "Thank you," she said quietly. Danny opened her mouth to respond, and then her gaze shifted to somewhere past Maya's shoulder, and the color left her face entirely. Maya turned around. A man she had never seen before was seated at table 1. And he was smiling directly at her. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. Before we continue, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and feel free to share your thoughts or experiences. Don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe. Thank you. He had the kind of smile that had been engineered to disarm, wide, unhurried, the smile of a man who had never once needed to take anything by force, because charm had always gotten there first. He was perhaps 50, silver-templed, dressed in a suit that cost nearly as much as Killian's, but wore it differently, louder, more deliberate, the way men dressed when they wanted to be seen rather than felt. He gestured to the seat across from him as Maya approached, as though she had been expected. As though this were his table. "You must be Maya," he said. "Sit with me a moment." "I don't sit with guests," she said, pulling out her order pad. "Can I get you something to drink?" "Vincent Creo," he said, ignoring the question entirely, offering his name the way men like him offered everything, as though it were a gift she should feel honored to receive. "I'm an old friend of Killian's. We go way back." He tilted his head slightly. "He talks about you, you know. More than he should." Something cold moved through her. She kept her face neutral. "I'll give you another moment with the menu." His hand closed around her wrist before she could step back. Not violently, that was the precision of it, the studied calibration of a man who understood exactly how much pressure communicated ownership without triggering a scene. The grip said, "You will stand here until I am finished." "I just want to talk," Vincent said pleasantly. "About your arrangement with my old friend. About what you've been telling him, and what, perhaps, you might consider telling me instead." He smiled again. "I'm a very generous man, Maya. Much more flexible than Killian in terms of what I'm willing to offer a woman in your position." The restaurant had not gone quiet this time. Nobody else had noticed. That was the sophistication of it, the violence hidden so neatly inside the architecture of a casual dinner conversation that the couple 2 tables over was still laughing about something on their phone. "Let go of my wrist," Maya said. Quietly. Levelly. The voice she used when she needed to sound more certain than she felt. Vincent's smile didn't move. In a moment. The moment never came, because Samuel was suddenly there, not rushing, not dramatic, simply present in the way a wall is present, immovable and absolute. He said nothing to Vincent. He placed one hand on the back of Vincent Creo's chair and leaned down to say something close to his ear that lasted approximately 4 seconds. Whatever those 4 seconds contained, Vincent's hand released her wrist. Samuel straightened. Looked at Maya. "Go to the back," he said quietly. "Stay there." She went. She stood in the corridor outside the kitchen and pressed her back against the wall and focused on her breathing with the concentrated effort of someone who understood that falling apart was a luxury she could not currently afford. She didn't see what happened next. She only heard it, the single, clean sound of shattering glass, sharp and final, cutting through the jazz like a punctuation mark. Then silence. Then the low, even resumption of conversation, as though the room had collectively agreed to forget. When Reeves found her 12 minutes later, his face was the color of old chalk. "Mr. Ward is here," he said. "He's asking for you." "Vincent Creo is gone," Reeves said. And the way he said it, the specific, careful weight he placed on that single word, made Maya understand that gone did not simply mean he had left the building. Her legs carried her toward table 1 before her mind had finished deciding to move. Killian was seated, jacket buttoned, bourbon untouched. He looked exactly as he always looked, composed, still unreachable. Except for his eyes, which when they found hers carried something she had not seen in them before. Something that looked almost like fury held on a very short leash. "Show me your wrist," he said. She held it out. The faint red pressure marks from Vincent's grip were already fading, barely visible in the low light. Killian looked at them for a long moment without touching her. Without speaking. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sit down, Maya," he said finally, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it. "I'm still on the clock." "Sit down." She sat. And for the first time since she had walked into that fire 30 days ago, she looked at the man across from her without any performance between them, no menu, no smile, no careful management of the distance. Just the truth of what this was. Killian Ward reached into his jacket pocket and set something on the table between them. It was the bracelet. "I need to tell you something," he said, "about why Vincent Creo came here tonight. And when I do, you're going to want to leave." His eyes held hers without apology. "I need to know if you will." She didn't leave. Killian had told her everything, the war brewing beneath the city's polished surface, the fractured alliance between him and Creo, the intelligence suggesting a move was coming, the timeline accelerating faster than anyone inside his circle had anticipated. He had laid it out with the flat, unembellished precision of a man who had long since stopped softening truth for anyone. When he finished, he had watched her face with the careful attention of someone who already knew what they were about to lose. Maya had sat with it for a long moment. Then she'd picked up the bracelet, turned it once in her fingers, and set it back down between them. "Same time tomorrow," she'd said. Something had moved through his eyes that she didn't have a word for yet. That had been 4 days ago. Tonight felt different from the moment she walked in. The kind of different that lived in the body before it reached the mind. A tightening across the shoulders, a heightened awareness of sound. The instinct that had kept her alive through circumstances that had nothing to do with mob wars and everything to do with simply growing up without a net. She had learned to trust that instinct the way some people trusted weather forecasts. Faster, and with better accuracy. The first thing she noticed was the staffing. 3 new waiters on the floor, all male, all moving with a precision that was slightly too choreographed for first-night nerves. She had trained enough new staff to know the difference between someone learning a room and someone who already knew exactly where everything was. These men knew. She watched one of them clock the kitchen entrance, the service corridor, the emergency exit near the east wall, in a single, practiced sweep disguised as a casual glance around the room. She pulled out her phone and typed one word to the number she had never intended to need. "Now." Samuel's response came in under 10 seconds. "Stay visible. Don't move him yet." The second thing she noticed was the sommelier. A man named Patrick who had worked Noir and Company for 6 years and moved through the wine service with the unhurried ease of deep professional habit. Tonight he was holding a bottle of the Chateau Margaux, Killian's preferred, but his thumb was positioned wrong, pressed against the label rather than cradling the base. 6 years of muscle memory didn't produce that. Nerves did. Or instruction. Patrick wasn't Patrick. She was at table 1 in 4 steps, arriving with a smile so practiced it could have convinced anyone watching that she was simply refreshing the bourbon. She leaned slightly across the table, straightening the candle, and spoke without moving her lips more than necessary. The sommelier. East Corridor. Now. Killian's eyes didn't move from her face. His hand, beneath the tablecloth, had already moved. The kitchen, she said. There's a secondary exit behind the dry storage, a loading corridor that connects to the alley on Mercer. Nobody knows it except staff. I'll take you through. Samuel. Samuel is at the front. They want him there. It's the back they're counting on being clear. 1 second. 2. The particular silence of a man deciding whether to trust something that could not be verified in time. He stood. Casually. The way a man stands when he's simply finished his drink. What followed was 90 seconds that Maya would spend the rest of her life refusing to fully reassemble in her mind. The controlled movement through the dining room. The kitchen door. The sudden eruption of sound from the front of house, glass, shouting, the terrible percussion of a room coming apart. The dry storage corridor, narrow and dark, her hand finding the correct turn by memory alone because the lights had already died. Killian's hand on her shoulder, not pulling, just present, grounding them both. The loading door. The cold air of the Mercer Alley. Samuel materializing from the shadows with 2 men Maya didn't recognize and a black vehicle already running. She stopped at the alley entrance. Her legs had made a decision her mind was still catching up to. Killian turned back. Looked at her in the half-dark, the sounds of chaos still bleeding from the building behind them. Come with me, he said. I need to go back in the other staff, Danny. They're already clear. I had people on the inside. A pause. I had people on you. She stared at him. How long? Since the night Vincent touched your wrist. The alley was cold and the city was loud and somewhere behind her something shattered, a second impact, closer than the first. Samuel said something sharp and urgent in a language she didn't speak. The car door was open. Maya looked at the building, then at the man standing in the dark, waiting for her answer with the patience of someone who already knew the asking was all he could do. She took 1 step toward the car. And then the shot rang out single, clean, close, and Killian moved in front of her so fast she didn't see it happen, only felt the displacement of air and the sudden wall of him between her and the sound. The silence that followed lasted exactly long enough for her to look down and see the spreading darkness at his side. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. Before we continue, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and feel free to share your thoughts or experiences. Don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe. Thank you. She didn't remember the drive. Later, when she tried to reconstruct it, she could retrieve only fragments, the leather seat, the particular cold of the window against her temple, Samuel's voice low and controlled on the phone. The way Killian's breathing had been measured and deliberate beside her in a way that told her he was managing pain the same way he managed everything else. By will. By the refusal to allow his body an audience. The estate materialized out of the dark like something that had always existed outside the city's awareness, set back from a private road behind iron gates and a tree line dense enough to feel intentional. Inside, it was nothing like she had imagined and exactly what she should have expected. No ostentation. No gilded excess. Clean architectural lines, dark wood, books everywhere. Actual books, cracked spines, and dog-eared pages. The library of a man who read to think rather than to display. It smelled like cedar and something older. Like a place that had been lived in honestly. 2 men she didn't recognize assisted Killian through a corridor while a woman in her 60s, introduced by nobody, requiring no introduction, directed Maya firmly into a bathroom off the main hall and handed her a first aid kit with the efficiency of someone who had done this before. Possibly often. Maya sat on the edge of a clawfoot tub and looked at her hands for the first time. A gash across her left palm, she didn't know when, and the beginning of bruising along her forearm where she had hit the loading door frame in the dark. She cleaned the cut with the focused attention of someone who needed a task to hold on to. Something small. Something completable. She was still sitting there when Killian appeared in the doorway. His jacket was gone. His shirt had been replaced, clean white, partially buttoned, a bandage visible at his left side where the bullet had grazed him deeply enough to matter, but not deeply enough to end things. His doctor, apparently, had been the third call Samuel made from the car. He looked at her palm without asking permission and crossed the room, lowering himself onto the tub's edge beside her with the careful movement of a man recalibrating his relationship with his own body. He took her hand and began redressing the cut with a precision that suggested this was not the first time he had done something like this. And the particular gentleness of it was so inconsistent with everything else she knew about him that she found she couldn't look directly at it. She looked at the wall instead. "You moved in front of me," she said. "Yes." That wasn't a tactical decision. A pause. "No." The silence that followed was different from every silence that had preceded it in the weeks of their strange, combustible orbit. Those silences had been charged, pressurized with power dynamics and careful performances, and the elaborate management of distance. This one was simply honest. Two people in a bathroom at 2 a.m. with their masks in pieces on the floor between them. "My whole life," Killian said finally, his eyes on her hand, his voice at a register she had never heard from him, quiet in the way that things are quiet when they have been stored somewhere airtight for a very long time. "Every room I walk into rearranges itself. Every person I speak to is already calculating, already managing me." He smoothed the edge of the bandage with his thumb. "You brought me bourbon from the second shelf and told me it was a good choice. You said it like it was just true." "It was just true," Maya said. "I know." He looked up then, and she made herself hold it, that gray, unguarded gaze, stripped of its winter, stripped of its careful architecture. "That's the only reason I came back the second night. And the third. You are the only thing in my life, Maya, that I do not have to translate." She felt the sentence land in the center of her chest and stay there. "Killian, I'm not asking you for anything," he said, with a firmness that was somehow also a kind of tenderness. "I know what I am. I know what this life costs the people adjacent to it. Tonight is evidence enough of that." His jaw tightened. "I am simply telling you the truth. Because you are apparently the only person I can do that with." Maya looked at their hands, his wrapped carefully around hers, the bandage neat and white in the low light. She thought about the note in her locker. The car on the street. Danny's face draining of color. The 90 seconds in the dark corridor that she would never fully reassemble. She thought about Deshawn, 3 semesters from the life she had sacrificed her ordinary one to build for him. She thought about the bracelet, still sitting on table 1. "Get some sleep," she said softly. "You were shot." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The architecture of 1A grays. "You were shot," she repeated. He looked at her for one long moment, then stood carefully, without complaint, and moved toward the door. He stopped at the threshold without turning around. "The east wing," he said. "Second door. There are clothes that will fit you well enough." A pause. "Stay. Until morning." She listened to his footsteps move down the corridor and disappear into the quiet of the house. She sat with the stillness for a long time. The cedar smell. The old books somewhere down the hall. The absolute, unfamiliar safety of a building that the city did not know how to find. Her phone lit up on the marble counter. Deshawn. A late-night text, the kind he sent when he couldn't sleep. "You good, sis?" She picked it up and typed back with her uninjured hand. "Getting there." She set the phone face down. Looked at the ceiling. Exhaled for what felt like the first time since she had walked into a lounge 11 days ago and picked up a menu. Then the house phone on the wall, old, corded, the kind nobody kept anymore, rang once, sharp and sudden, and she heard Samuel answer it somewhere in the building. The silence that followed his answer was 3 seconds long. Then his footsteps, fast and deliberate, moving toward Killian's wing. Maya was already standing before she understood why.